You know it's a casual video when the Hudson's Bay mug is here. Greetings comic lovers, we're going to be talking about some topical time of recording news. A couple of you messaged and asked me what I thought about the new announcements about DC's Chapter 1 for their movie and TV adaptation slate. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and if you've been here a while, you know that when it comes to adaptations, I can take them or leave them. I love some adaptations, they're amazing, I dislike others, but on the whole, I don't feel like adaptations are the be-all end-all of either a comic book or a character's life. And if they are to happen, I want it to be with some genuine love for the characters behind them. So James Gunn and Peter Safran recently came out with their 10 project slate announcement for the next several years, which was a lot, but also there's part of me that whenever they do these big announcements for whichever company is, whatever they're announcing, when you start announcing so far in advance, you're just increasing the chance of things not happening. So many things can happen in between now and say 10 years from now, or even 5 or 3, that could completely alter how things look. So with all of these, I would say take it with a grain of salt until you're watching it or holding it and you're like, yeah, this happened. I mean, even look at Batgirl. You can still be written off right before the finish line. Now they're calling this Chapter 1, not Phase 1 of the DCU, not the DCEU. They're trying to make everything kind of line up, sort of. And they're calling it Gods and Monsters, which has nothing to do, apparently, with that animated movie, which then spun off into a couple of decent comics. I'm a little sad. Kurt Langstrom Batman was actually pretty cool. There's also a whole bunch of speculation swirling around what's still going on, what's still greenlit, and what's actually going to be canceled. Things like the Flash movie are going forward, Blue Beetle is going forward, and you have stuff that's still in development as Elseworlds now, like the Batman or that Ta-Nehisi Coates Superman project, but we'll see what actually ends up, again, coming to fruition. There is a long gap between now and when things are actually going to be produced. The first thing they announced was for 2025, I believe. Basically, this is one of those announcements that's supposed to make you get hype as a fan. Based on how this announcement was received, because it's been a few days, because I'm a little late as always, 'tis my trademark, also had food poisoning, but it's also on brand for me to be this late. Not everybody took it that way. There was a Fire James Gunn hashtag and a Fire James Gunn and Peter Safran hashtag, although it's not uncommon to get a hashtag going for anything. Let's take it with a grain of salt. So, movies first, we have Superman Legacy. They promise that you will not have to see the origin again, but I'll believe that when I see it. They say Superman Legacy will mark the start of the DCU, but will not be an origin story. It focuses on Superman balancing his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing. He is the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way. He is kindness in a world that thinks of kindness as old-fashioned. Mileage is definitely going to vary on the whole Kryptonian heritage balancing with human upbringing, depending upon how you view Clark and the amount of otherness that he has. Clark's relationship to Krypton, historically, canonically, is very tenuous and something he learns about much later in his life. It's something he has a much more abstract connection to than, say, Supergirl or some of the others who have actually been on Krypton and seen it. It's distant for him. He doesn't have any recollections of it. He just has information about it. So that creates a very different relationship with Krypton than other Kryptonians. So the idea that it's a balancing act, unless Kryptonian heritage means his powers and not anything culturally. But on the whole, for me, that sends up a bit of a, we'll see how we're going. It sounds a bit New 52-y, and depending upon how you feel about New 52 Superman, that may land or not land. Another thing that may land or not is that this project is being written by Gunn, who Safran also hopes will direct it. Gunn has a very specific style and way of writing. I'm not sure if it will translate to Superman. Perhaps if some of the crass humor can be reined in, but we'll see. Time will tell. Gunn stated, Superman is for everyone. That's a 4-quadrant film that should speak to everyone in the world. Next up, The Authority, which you may have more of an affinity for if you came up in comics in the 90s or have a big affinity for that kind of Wildstorm era. The Authority is a team, admittedly for me, that I know more of than have read of them. By the time I got into comics, Wildstorm had been folded into the DC universe and they weren't doing a lot with those characters. This is where you have stuff like Midnighter and Apollo. They're very much more anti-hero style heroes. They're very aggressive, or at least they were in their old universe. Apparently Superman Legacy is going to lead directly into the Authority, so I'm wondering if it's going to be like a Superman versus the Elite type of situation. Here's some quotes. The Authority is an ensemble movie about superhumans who have a less than idealistic approach to saving the world. The Authority was created by Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch as an ends justify the means superhero team, an approach that appealed to Gunn and Safran's desire to diversify the storytelling within the DCU. It isn't just a story of heroes and villains, and not every movie and TV show is going to be about good guy versus bad guy. There are people that are very questionable, like the Authority, who basically believe that you can't fix the world in an easy manner, and they take things into their own hands. I'm interested to see how those two concepts can balance with each other, from Superman Legacy to The Authority. The Authority feels like something that might be more at home in its own separate universe. There's no reason to have it in the same one, especially if multiverses and Elseworlds are already in play. But again, we will see how it goes. I'm sure some people are just thrilled that they're going to actually see The Authority. Next up, The Brave and the Bold, which no, will not just be Batman teaming up with different people. I wish, just for 2 or 3 hours. Let's make it Avatar length. 3 hours of him just teaming up with different people. This is gonna be separate than from Robert Pattinson, which is still going on with that sequel. That's gonna be Elseworlds. This series is gonna seek to introduce the Bat family, and they're gonna start with Robin, specifically Damian Wayne. So I'm not sure if we're skipping ahead or people are gonna have different personas. Again, we'll have to see how that works out. Gunn said that Damian is his favorite Robin, a little son of a bitch, an assassin, and a murderer. So all of that character development that's happened with Damian throughout the comics, we're not there yet. We're right at the beginning, at the potentially, some would say, worst iteration of Damian, because they're specifically adapting the Damian version from the Grant Morrison run. Remember the Damian who would just backhand you and try to kill you and call women all kinds of names? That Damian. The project is based on the run of Batman comics authored by Grant Morrison, who Gunn said was exceptionally influential in the DCU. See, but now they're using DCU as a blanket term. The question becomes, on this new film verse you're doing or on the comics? Because both could be true. The other comics writer Gunn mentioned by name was Tom King, who participated in the DCU writer's room and leads right into the next feature project. Depending upon how you feel about Tom King's works, your mileage is definitely going to vary about that. Tell me about your mileage down below. We have Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, which is adapting the comic of that name. So if you enjoyed that comic, rejoice. If you didn't, cry. Or, I don't know, maybe something less dramatic. Feel slight sadness. Supergirl is a difficult one for many people to get a handle on, and there have been so many different iterations of her over time. It's not surprising to me that they picked a concentrated miniseries to focus on. Even the idea of focusing on a more angry Kara sounds interesting, but again, it just depends on how you felt about that mini and if that is the best way to introduce Supergirl. It has the potential, if not handled correctly, to make her extremely unlikable. Gunn explained, it's a very different type of Supergirl. We see the difference between Superman, who was sent to Earth and raised by loving parents from the time he's an infant, versus Supergirl, who was raised on a rock chip off of Krypton and watched everyone around her die and be killed in terrible ways for the first 14 years of her life. Gunn said this Supergirl will be much more hardcore. And finally, they have Swamp Thing, which they're incredibly vague about, except that it's going to have a slightly horror approach. Safran described it as the prism of horror. Then Gunn segued into how he had to fight resistance with getting Rocket Raccoon on screen next to Thor, and how they're going to up that with Swamp Thing. I can't imagine in this world of aggressive CG that much resistance to Swamp Thing on the grounds of the fact that he's a creature, just more on the grounds of people being like, who's Swamp Thing? What? He had that TV series and that got canceled right quick. Gunn stated, this is a much more horrific film, but we'll still have Swamp Thing interact with the other characters. Is he a man or a plant? It's a genuine question depending on which era of Alec, if we're dealing with Alec we're talking about. Television time! 5 shows, let's do it. Creature Commandos. This one's animated, which excites me. I wish more of the projects were animated, but I know in general animation tends to be viewed as a lesser art form, which is a whole other discussion, something I entirely disagree with. And if you've been paying attention to how Warner Brothers has been canceling things and moving around, animation has been heavily targeted in general. So it's hardly surprising. Even though DC has some amazing animated films. So good. This series is written by Safran and Gunn together, every episode. They're going back to the 80s for this one, to a team I'll come out and admit I'm not familiar with Creature Commandos at all. I have no strong feelings one way or the other. The original premise features Frankenstein's monster teaming up with a werewolf, a vampire, and a Gorgon to fight Nazis in World War II. But this version apparently is going to take characters from the Suicide Squad, specifically James Gunn's version, and run with that as well. Gunn did have some nice things to say about animation and the scope of things that you could do with it, so that was nice. But Gunn also went on to highlight the fact that the voice actors will be the same should they go forward with live action versions. So that will play a part in the casting, which is a nice synergy moment. But it must also be acknowledged, because this gets brushed aside a lot, that there are different skill sets involved for acting and voice acting. And some people can cross over and do both, and some actors cannot voice act at all. It doesn't, you've heard it. It does not work.
The Hive haven't been on Earth in centuries. That wizard came from the moon.
Although for some people I know it really doesn't matter and they'd rather have that continuity. Next up on the TV front, Waller. Waller's getting a series because Gunn can't do season 2 of Peacemaker because he has to do Superman. So it's going to continue off of Peacemaker and focus more on that character. Gunn's really excited about this one. He says it's the greatest show ever of all time. Drop everything. Save the future date, whatever it is. According to this and Creature Commandos are supposed to debut before Superman Legacy, so before 2025. Safran called him an aperitif to the DCU. You better hope people like him then. That's a bold claim. Next, Lanterns. If you recall or were keeping up with news, there was an HBO Max version of Green Lantern's TV series that was going to happen. That's scrapped. We're not doing it. Anything there, forget about it. It's over. Now it's a series about Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart in the vein of True Detective. They're gonna team up and investigate a mystery. Can Hal please trip over something? That is my one request. It can be in a chase scene, so it happens naturally. I want this. Safran described it as a very important show for us. I mean, if you can pull off Lanterns, then spin off and do all of the different Lanterns, that would be amazing. Basically describing the difference between the two shows as they stand was the previous version Safran described was more of a space opera, whereas their version is more true detective, terrestrial-based investigation story. So depending upon which you prefer, this may be very exciting news or very disappointing news. Next up, Paradise Lost. Did you ever want a Wonder Woman show that didn't have Wonder Woman in it? Paradise Lost is for you. This Game of Thrones-ish story is set on the island of Themyscira before the birth of Diana. It's really about the political intrigue behind a society of all women. How did this come about? What's the origin of an island of all women? What are the beautiful truths and the ugly truths behind all that? What's the scheming like between the different power players in that society? Paradise Lost is not the Milton reference that I thought it was, but was instead a reference to Paradise Island Lost, the comic book storyline by Phil Jimenez and George Perez, which makes more sense because that was about civil war in Themyscira, but my first reaction was Milton? I don't know if anybody else had that reaction, if it was just me. I don't know if describing something as Games of Thrones-ish after how that last season ended is the best lead-in. For me, it just conjures up images of coffee cups, plots that ended up being completed by different characters, and water bottles. But miles will vary. It might be something that some people have a harder time connecting with if Diana's not there yet. It still feels very much in pitch phase, like Swamp Thing, which is basically like a horror movie. And finally, this is the one that people were asking me about, Booster Gold. If you've been here a while, you know that I love Booster Gold. He's one of my favorite characters since I read him in the 52, not the new 52, the 52 event. His series following that is one of my all-time favorites. I'm so sad that it never got collected entirely into like a nice little omnibus or trade. This one is going obviously with the thing that happens to Booster Gold all the time, which is a back to basics type of Booster Gold, which is Booster Gold, who just came from the future and who's in it for the money and has the big ego and is a lot more of a comedic character. Here's the description that Safran gave him. A loser from the future who uses basic future technology to come back to today and pretend to be a superhero. Well, I mean, some of it's basic, not all of it's basic. Is Skeets gonna be there? Can we still use Skeets with what the slang now means? Gunn stated, basically Booster Gold is imposter syndrome as a superhero. We'll see how this goes. We will really see. If they lean too much into it being comedic, it could be a hot mess. If it allows for an evolution of Booster Gold, that could be very fun. It's obviously gonna have to go back to basics because Booster Gold is pretty inside baseball for a lot of people. It seems like an interesting choice. Just in terms of the characters they've chosen in general, a lot of these seem like interesting choices and like they're trying to distance themselves from the DCEU as much as possible, regardless of whether or not they're picking characters that are going to have the most mass market appeal or who they're going to be able to transform in that way. Not every obscure team can become Guardians of the Galaxy in like the film sense. On the whole, for me, I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty meh, just because I don't trust anything until it's in front of me, until I'm watching it. Would seeing Booster be cool? Yes, but only if it's good. That's the thing with all of these. For me, it's very much yes, but only if it's good. But how about you? Did this get you really excited for the DCU? Do you feel like these were good choices to start with? Are there things here that are definitely going on your future hypothetical calendar that's gonna keep them in mind? Or are there some choices you just think are horrendous and you don't understand why they're making them and just what are they doing? Are you done with superhero adaptations in general? Are you still salty about Henry Cavill? Share all of your thoughts down below. I'm sorry I had slightly less pep in my step for this. That McDonald's burger nearly took me out. If you feel like it, tell me about the worst food poisoning you ever got down below. Why not? We're just gonna talk about casual things today. Thanks so much for taking some time today to spend it discussing comics adjacent stuff with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll be back with more videos as soon as I can. Bye-bye.